We gather as a community to remember and celebrate the life of William Russell Hochman, who invited us every day to embrace a dynamic world, challenging us to think, daring us to be bold, finding joy in the gift of life, in the gift of bringing us together. We gather to honor Bill and his importance to us, as we acknowledge our loss and care for each other in our grief, asking what we hold as sacred to grant us the courage to accept our loss and strength to remember Bill as we respect his memory by living fully and embracing life freely. And so in this space, connected to our hearts, we pause, present with each other, present with Bill's spirit, to give thanks for the gift of who he was in our lives, as together we hold and bless this space. Amen.
have two poems, one before you and one that I will read, by Siegfried Sassoon. One indicates the statement that Bill made. Peace is my passion, but I am not a pacifist. It is an interesting expression, but is true to Bill. I would like to say that his life is a way of bringing history as a reminder of the essential nature of peace. Siegfried Sassoon, Aftermath. Have you forgotten yet? For the world's events have rumbled on since those gagged days, like traffic checked while at the crossing of city ways. And the haunted gap in your mind has filled with thoughts that flow like clouds in the lit heaven of life. And you are a man reprieved to go, taking your peaceful share of time with joy to spare. But the past is just the same, and war's a bloody game. Have you forgotten yet? Look down and swear by the slain of the war that you'll never forget. Do you remember the dark months you held the sector at Mehmet's? The nights you watched and wired and dug and piled sandbags on the parapets? Do you remember the rats, the stench of corpses rotting in front of the front line trench? And dawn coming, dirty white, and chill with a hopeless rain. Do you ever stop and ask, is it all going to happen again? Do you remember that hour of din before the attack, and the anger, the blind compassion that seized and shook you then as you peered at the doomed and haggard faces of your men? Do you remember stretcher cases lurching back with dying eyes and lolling heads, those ashen gray masks of the lads who once were keen and kind and gay? Have you forgotten yet? Look up and swear by the green of the spring that you will never forget.
Each of us has our own stories to share about Bill. During the reception, you are invited to share your stories around the tables. For today, in this space, Tim, one of Bill's 6 children, Peter, Horst, and Susan, Bill's colleagues and friends, and Harris, one of Bill's former students and friend, will share some of their reflections.
It's a little somber. Let's, Jesus. Thank you all for being here today to honor my father. This is an absurd turnout. It is my privilege to be with you this afternoon and to represent the Hochman family. Before I speak about Bill, it's important to acknowledge that we are missing a huge presence today as my sister Deanie passed away this January. Her energy and love of life are sorely missed, especially on this occasion. To quote my cousin Peter Blegvad, I would describe my preparations for today as a grim business. How can I adequately summarize in a few minutes what my father meant to our family? You all know and love him in 1,000 ways. The sum of your experiences with Bill and the influence he had within the institutions he served are his legacy. When we think of Bill, we think of the Colorado College, the Navy, the ACLU, the Democratic Party, Columbia University, Pillar, and Zebulon Pike Youth Services Center. There are many facets of my father that will be given their due with the speakers to come. I'm ill-prepared to discuss his academic and political achievements, my areas of expertise being jazz rock groups of the 1970s and Dungeons and Dragons. However, I'd like to share some of my experiences as his son and perhaps reveal some aspects of my father you may not know. Dad had an influence that was not easily forgotten and which transcended the classroom. I have many childhood memories of people recognizing him in public, no matter the locale, on the tube in London, in a cafe in Paris, or a beach in Lisbon. Former students, colleagues, and friends would appear and shout, "Professor Hochman!" He always knew them. His memory was remarkable and would have a quip or anecdote ready for each. It was only much later that I realized that this was unusual. To those that knew him and had been his students, Bill was the embodiment of the virtues he had taught. Those values were defined by his experience in the Second World War and are the very reason that so many of us are wearing his handmade peace pins today. Our family shared in that same learning experience, albeit in a more intimate way. Despite his status as a giant at CC, Dad was endlessly supportive of my interests, which were usually less than academic. From my early obsessions with Doctor Who, comic books, and skateboarding, and on into my life as a musician, he was unwavering in his support. He reveled in the process of our own self-discovery and found expertise. It was much the same for Michael's basketball, Maggie's wedding photography, Abby and John's academic achievements, and our dearly departed sister Deanie's entrepreneurship. The pressure he placed on us was not to follow a specific path, but to be excellent in what we became. And while his passion for academics would be an ever-present theme in our lives, as an aside, my first word was book, which, as you can imagine, delighted him. I never once felt diminished that I had not lived up to his accomplishments. He even managed to hide his considerable disappointment that Michael became a corporate rather than a constitutional lawyer. He planted the seeds that started my professional career paths, both as a musician and in technology. Our house was always full of music. The Beatles, Mozart, and Ella Fitzgerald began a journey for me that continues to this day. And while Dad was infamous in his disdain of modern composers, and my patience was certainly tested trying to explain to him for the 100th time that why hip-hop was indeed music, his passion for the arts became my own. And as a technologist, he loved gadgets. Anything innovative that would transform mundane tasks fascinated him. Sorry, I need some water. This brought personal computers into our house in the early 80s and started a fixation that we shared until the very end. He became so involved with technology that he chaired the computer policy board at CC for many years and actually wrote and sold software that did taxes and basic accounting in the back of computer magazines. Right? This became my ultimate path as well, as I'm now the CEO of an IT consulting firm that I founded in 2003. Our extended family lacks the traditional model. Dad, having Michael and I at an age when most sane people would be reveling in their newfound freedom, we are all the better for it. My sisters and brother from Dad's first marriage and their families are a unique group of amazing people that I'm proud to know. This has also provided me with lots of factoids like, my sister is older than my mom, which is really good at cocktail parties. He loved children, and that much is clear as he was very prolific. But even as he aged well into his 90s, he delighted in their presence. I have cherished memories of his howls of laughter as my daughter Violet would headbutt him in the stomach. Sorry. For some indiscretion kept between them. Or of his special bond with my son Ari, who showed him that the value of people with intellectual disabilities transcends what we learn in traditional classrooms. Our family was lucky to share that time with him, and I'm grateful that my children experienced those moments. All right, this part's going to be hard. All of his children would agree that the single best thing to ever happen to my father was meeting my mom. Everyone who knows Bill well has heard him wax poetically about his devotion to Nancy, the miracle Nance. This suffocating, panic-inducing love, no, I'm kidding. This love transformed his entire life. And now, let us take some time to pay tribute to Nancy, for it's easy to say that my father lived a full and independent life at home until the ripe age of 97. The reality is without Mom's unending support and love, that tale becomes a myth. She was the light of his life, and he lived and influenced us all because of their incredible partnership. Love you, Mom. To close, let me ask for a moment from each of you here today. Think back on your time spent with Bill and recall a moment or a conversation with him that stayed with you. How did that influence your life? How was your foundation altered or your attic rearranged? We must remember to delight in the new perspectives we gain from knowing Bill and pass them on. His greatest desire was to make the world a more peaceful and just place. Keeping his ideas alive does just that. Thank you.
It's hard to follow that. Good afternoon. Many of you know me here. Many of you don't. I'm Peter Blasenheim, and Bill Hochman was chair of the history department when I was hired 46 years ago to teach Latin American and African history here at Colorado College. For nearly half a century, Bill and I have been very close friends as well as colleagues. This is why there was no question in my own mind that I would say a few words about Bill, as much for my own sake as for my audience. At the beginning of a speech I was asked to deliver on the occasion of my retirement this academic year, a speech coincidentally scheduled just a few days after Bill died. When I hugged Nancy after my speech, I felt honored and privileged that she asked me to speak those few remarks on this occasion. So I ask for the forbearance of those of you who, with some tweaking, are hearing these words for a second time. I said then that it was hard to talk about this extraordinary, extraordinary man who had played such a fundamental role in the evolution of Colorado College since 1955, first as professor, then as chair and molder of the history department for, 17 years? Summer session dean, one of the founders and leaders of the Freedom and Authority program. Little did I realize when he picked me up at the airport in February of 1973 that he would play such a major role in my own life. But we did hit it off from the beginning. To be sure, it helped that we were both New Yorkers. On that first ride into town, I don't recall exactly, but perhaps it was the way he responded to my questions about the college and the city, or my reply to his queries about Brazil. I had flown just about directly from Brazil to my interview here. His queries about Brazil and Latin America. More likely, we hit it off because I knew which Broadway stars and which Broadway nonentities had played roles in the pajama game. But we really did hit it off. What aspect of Bill should I talk about in the next few minutes? I could start out by talking about his love of family, Nancy and his children and grandchildren, but there's not enough time to do that. I could talk about his public service and public spiritedness, a few of the things that Tim mentioned, the ACLU, the Democratic Party, his involvement with the Pillar Institute for Lifelong Learning, which incidentally he pulled me into a few years ago, and in which I've been pretty deeply involved ever since. Teaching civics and American history to incarcerated youth into his mid-90s. But I won't do that either. His other passions, travel, music, the theater, but I won't. My personal relationship with Bill, how he held my hand and supported me when I was trying to write a PhD dissertation in the good old days when we taught 9 blocks, 9 courses a year. Too many other personal stories, but I won't go there either. So many aspects of this extraordinary man. But what I will talk about was his passion for teaching. There's no way to overstate the time and the effort and the energy he put into his teaching. That's got to be front and center. His oft-repeated quote, which I heard him say so many times, "It's a privilege to teach these kids." Ask his students, the aging, often doddering alums who showed up every October at homecoming, in large part in order to see Bill, to participate in the Freedom and Authority program. I'm thinking of Bill as inspiring teacher, Bill as role model, and at the expense of repeating the word liberal several times over, Bill's liberal values, his liberal ideas and ideals which he conveyed to his students, and of course his liberal politics, throwing up his arms in his modern U.S. history course, as that famous poster shows us, to proclaim, "And then came Franklin D. Roosevelt." His own commitment to the liberal arts, ahead of his time in so many ways. We talk nowadays so much about diversifying the curriculum, but it was Bill who spearheaded the proposal to hire a Latin Americanist and Africanist, that is me, a pretty unconventional, unusual thing to do in 1973 at a small liberal arts college, but who inspired that hire, my hiring in the first place. Honestly, his passion for teaching made it hard for him to adjust to changes at the college in the course of the last 30 years or so. And if at times he did so less gracefully than he might have, it was always because that passion for teaching trumped everything, trumped all else. That is, his concerns that some of these changes interfered or compromised the teaching mission of the college. Which leads me to say that it wasn't fun to disagree with Bill Hochman. Sometimes I did, but I often found myself telling myself, and certainly telling younger colleagues, that though this institution had been around since 1874, as far as I was concerned, and as far as I am concerned, Bill Hochman invented Colorado College. I'm closing with one example of the personal, which I said I wouldn't do, but I'm doing. On a cold late afternoon, or it was early evening, during advising week, during my first year here, after a long day of teaching and advising, as we were walking out of Palmer Hall together, he asked me if I was doing okay. And I told him, after spending hours in the classroom teaching and then advising, that I was feeling totally oiskamitchit, which is one of those untranslatable Yiddishisms I learned at my father's knee. Oiskamitchit roughly means worn out from doing good deeds. A lot of martyrdom there, but also a touch of self-promotion, if one says it about oneself, but that's neither here nor there. The point is, boy, did Bill get it. And together, we laughed, and we laughed, and we laughed. Thank you.
Horst Richardson, colleague, friend, neighbor, coach. Those of you who came in through the front of the chapel no doubt noticed action on the quad. Intramural game going on across Cascade, spring fling party, students celebrating. Bill would have loved it. He would have been out there. Let me take you on a quick trip. Just across the campus to the Tutt Library. I want to take you down in the basement of the Tutt Library to special collections. Great place to visit. You ought to go there sometime. If you were to walk in there and ask for the Bill Hochman files, then Jesse Randall or Amy Brooks would bring you a folder. And you would sit down at the large tables there, open the folder, and you would see a lot of pictures of Bill Hochman. Certainly, you would see a picture of him as a teacher, a passionate teacher, as Peter has just told you about. And then you could go over to the registrar's office and you talk to Phil Apodaca there, and he will estimate that Bill taught in his 43 years of active teaching at Colorado College 250 classes, 4,000 plus students. What an achievement. What an incredible achievement. Teaching, as Peter said, was for him a privilege. Well, you could find some more pictures of Bill. Certainly you would find pictures of Bill at homecoming, surrounded by legions of alums eager to follow him to Bemis Hall, where he would discuss that year's book for Freedom and Authority. Probably his favorite class. The alumni office, actually, you won't believe this, they produced a list of all the books discussed in those Freedom and Authority courses. And if you added all of those alums to the 4,000 students he taught, you know, we'd be getting up there in the numbers. Another picture, and this one, I bet you wouldn't recognize him. Bill was quite an actor. Bill, the history professor, was on the stage at Colorado College. In historically significant plays, of course, Bill as king in Sophocles' Oedipus Rex. Bill as Holy Roman Emperor in Marlowe's Dr. Faustus. And if Eve Tilley is out there in the audience, Eve Tilley told me he was hilarious in that role. In Bertolt Brecht's Galileo, Osborne's Luther, there, Ken Burton, who was then chaplain in this space, starred as Martin Luther. So Bill the actor, and it isn't a big step or a vast distance from the stage to Bill being the faculty marshal. For many, many years, you know, he, in academic regalia, would attempt, and I stress attempt, to herd the full faculty in line to march together to a baccalaureate service or a convocation or a commencement service. In fact, at one commencement, Bill wanted me to be a deputy marshal, giving me an assignment. He wanted me to stand at the bottom of the stage where the graduates would have to walk across with a huge long list in hand, alphabetized, making sure that all our students early in the morning in the hot sun would march across in proper order. I hesitated. Big responsibility, you know, make one mistake, everything is kaput. So Bill came up to me, put his right hand on my left shoulder, and he said, "Horst, my boy, you can do it." What could I say? How could I resist? So, yes, I accepted the assignment and survived. But my favorite picture of him in these many, many pictures is Bill and his intramural team. Bill as pitcher, as coach, as manager. You know, he started that intramural softball team shortly after he came in 1955, probably wrote the rules for the program, co-ed competition against, you know, student teams. The faculty and the staff team called Mind and Body. Mind and Body, obviously echoing, you know, classical Greek Olympian ideals, amateur ideals, which he so cherished. So, come spring, you know, he would recruit from the faculty and staff. Maybe they would have a couple of practice sessions, and he would send out notices. First, in the old days, through college memos, maybe a phone call, later emails. And Kerry Williams remembers receiving this invite. And here's the banner headline: "This is the year. This is the year we're going to win it all." And he would call together his sluggers and aces to deal with the students, who of course never got any older, right? The faculty and staff every year is a year older. The students were always young and athletic and fleet-footed. So he tried his best to motivate his forces. Another member of that team, Heather Sparses, remembers when they played against the hockey team. Tough competition, right? All those studs. And when one of them would hit a home run, Bill would point out and say, "Get that guy over to Betcher." Betcher is the student health center. "Get that guy over to Betcher. Check him out. I bet he's on steroids." Yeah. One year, Bill was away, probably in London, sabbatical. What to do, right? So he appointed none other than slugger Dave Armstrong to be captain and manager. What a responsibility. He left instructions, you know, lineups, batting orders, even made a motivational tape a tape to be played before each game in a boombox to make sure that, the guys and gals were all fired up. Well, here's the thing. Dave Armstrong actually has a copy of that tape still. And we listened to it the other day. It's a little used and garbled, but we're going to play it for you now. Here it is.
Come on, mind and body. Hit the ball. Throw the ball. Field the ball. Catch the ball. Come on, mind and body. Hit the ball. Throw the ball. Field the ball. Catch the ball.
How can you not win that game, right? After Bill retired full-time, Peter already mentioned that, he volunteered at the Zebulon Pike Youth Detention Center, taught U.S. history, the Bill of Rights. I went over there to check it out. I mean, it's a pretty scary place. Security, heavy security. Spoke with some of the folks over there who remembered the professor. Today the professor is coming, right? I talked to a Mr. Schaefer, who was a co-teacher, and, he remembered Bill fondly. Apparently, on occasions, while Bill was inside the enclosure teaching, every now and then somebody got out of hand, and the leader of the gang inside would say, "Don't worry, Professor, we got your back." One day, the kids from the center, under supervision, of course, went to a ball game, Sky Sox, and Bill was invited to go. Probably sat somewhere behind third base, and one of the batters, foul ball. One of the kids from the Pike Detention Center caught the ball, gave it to Bill, and he cherished it forever. So, at this point, I want everybody to stand up. Everybody stand up. All of you guys as well, right? If you got your ball cap with you, you can put it on now. Sort of seventh inning stretch, And we're going to honor Bill in song. A song that he no doubt would have loved, and a song that all of you know. So take a deep breath. Are we ready? Okay, here we go. Sing it with me. Take me out to the ball game. Take me out with the crowd. Buy me some peanuts and Cracker Jacks. I don't care if I never go back. So let's root for the home team. If we lose, it's a shame. But where it's 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out in the old ball game. Yeah, that's pretty good. And Bill is smiling. Bill is smiling. Thank you.
Horst, you're a very tough act to follow. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Harris Sherman. I am honored to say a few things about my professor, my mentor, and my friend, Bill Hochman. I first met Bill when I was 17, and he was a young professor here at CC. I had come to CC as a somewhat aimless kid. In fact, because of my less than inspiring high school record, on my first day I was called into Dean Warner's office with 3 other classmates. We were told that we were the least likely to succeed, and we could be well gone after the first semester. It was not a particularly auspicious start. But that very afternoon, I met my faculty advisor, Professor Hochman. I think he liked the fact that I had long hair, I was somewhat iconoclastic, and I carried around a violin case. He and Professor Ross endearingly called me the yiddle with a fiddle. From that very first day on, and then over a span of almost 60 years, Bill often greeted me with that big smile and bear hug and a robust, "How's my boy?" During our freshman orientation, Bill gave his memorable and classic lecture about what life and times at CC would be. We heard about the value of a liberal arts education that would teach us to answer the questions of who am I and why is my life worth living? Upperclassmen had advised us to enroll early in Bill's introductory Western Civilization course. The word was out that his classes were so popular you often couldn't get in. My classmate Marla Bullock cried when, despite her best efforts, she didn't get in. It was not an act. When Bill noticed how devastated and passionate she was, of course, he took pity on her, bent the rules, and snuck her in. I think every course I took at Colorado College, I took every course that Bill Hochman taught at Colorado College over the next 4 years. He had a magic and a gift that would make history come alive. He stimulated us to think about the most important fundamental issues facing mankind. There was no memorization in Bill's classes. His teaching was about reasoning, about problem solving, and thinking. Bill was always connecting the dots, constantly moving between past and present. He loved tying historical events to the movement of arts and the sciences and the humanities. Every class was like a puzzle. It was mesmerizing. As a later CC history major, Phil Swan, aptly described to me, Hochman's classes were inspirational and spine-tingling. I should note that Phil, early in his successful professional career, paid homage to his mentor by endowing the William Hochman Professorship of History. Our class would convene in room 233 in Palmer Hall. Professor Hochman, as we know, was tall and imposing. You might as well sit in the front row because, as Bob Seelig, another history major, remarked, there was nowhere to hide. Professor Hochman always looked a bit ruffled. That is, until Nancy came along. His sweaters were sometimes torn at the elbow, his shirt tail sometimes out, his peace button front and center. He had that deep, resonant voice. He usually started his recent U.S. history class standing with his hand over his heart and bellowing out, "Bend the knee to Franklin D." And then that wonderful laugh just to assure everybody he was kidding. While we all knew where he stood politically, he loved and encouraged dissent and debate. Class discussions were inclusive, respectful, and often with good humor. Now, one particular experience comes to mind about my education at CC in my senior year. As part of the Histories Honor Program, I wrote my thesis on the application of the 14th Amendment and Bill of Rights to the states. This was a subject that Bill Hochman, as a constitutional scholar, knew a lot about. But there were unresolved questions and areas, and it was ripe for further review. So under Bill's tutelage, I started my analysis of what turned out to be the most rigorous part of my CC education. Every week, I met with Bill in his Palmer office for an intensive grilling. It was exhausting and mind-boggling, but it was so good. Bill was very proud of the final product and would often refer to it decades later when teaching classes on the Bill of Rights. I couldn't have imagined how important that Socratic jousting would be to me professionally until 8 years later. I was a young lawyer coming from Columbia Law School back to start my practice in Denver. One of my first classes involved assisting a number of Native American organizations outraged by the discriminatory employment practices of the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the very agency that was supposed to protect them. In reality, this agency had systematically locked Native Americans out of almost all the leadership positions in the agency for well over a century. I had discovered some obscure and forgotten statutes that gave Native Americans a preference in employment in their own agency. When I confronted the agency and it refused to voluntarily change its employment practices, I filed a federal lawsuit which clearly hit a nerve chord. One federal court agreed with me, then another court disagreed. Because of the case's significance, we soon had that extremely rare experience of being called before the United States Supreme Court. For me, at age 29, it was a bit daunting. In extensive briefings and then preparation for oral argument, I thought back a lot about my senior thesis with Bill and the Socratic jousting. What a great mentor he had been. When the big day finally arrived, I stood before the 9 justices, admittedly nervous. Justice Douglas, sensing that, and perhaps channeling Bill, winked at me, as if to say, it's okay. Then the questions began. The argument was spirited and fun. Honestly, their questions were tame compared to what Bill had put me through a decade earlier. Bill took great pride in the outcome of the case and probably never fully realized how important his contribution had been, how lucky I was, how grateful I am. And yes, the Supreme Court ruled 9-0 in our favor. Bill wasn't only a master teacher, he was far more than that. First and foremost, he truly loved his students. He genuinely cared about you. He took personal interest in you, always wanting to know your background and what you were up to. He got to know you partly because he was everywhere on campus. During my 4 years, he was not only my advisor, he was my class's advisor. He was advisor to student government. He was advisor to the Honor Council. And of course, he was the feared pitcher for the faculty softball team. And I dare not forget those wonderful evenings at the Hochman residence on Terrace Road, where students would go for a buffet dinner, get to know the Hochman family, and always have a spirited discussion. When you graduated, Bill took great delight catching up and learning how the CC experience might have made a difference. He was the favorite speaker year in and year out for class reunions, where somehow he could recite intimate details about your particular class and about you. By the way, have you ever met anybody with a better memory than Bill? His mind was extraordinary. He could recall what happened to you 30, 40, 50 years ago. And if you didn't remember, as you often didn't, He had an article, a letter, a note, a piece of paper somehow filed away in that basement on Terrace Road, just to refresh your memory. Bill's talents went far beyond CC, and you've heard about that today. One of the things that made him such a great teacher was his connection to the outer world. He was a fervent advocate for the American Civil Liberties Union. He was involved in local, state, and federal politics. As a student, I witnessed his leadership as the secretary of the Colorado Democratic Party. He periodically got involved in campaigns and sometimes jumped into national political frays. He was a delegate to the 1960, 64, 68, and 72 Democratic National Conventions, and he served on the platform and credential committees, often during turbulent times. These political roles definitely added to his political and historical perspectives, from which we, students, benefited immeasurably. Some of these political forays were not always serious. One favorite story involved my classmate, Jean Torkin, who loved Bill Hochman as a professor, but totally disagreed with his politics. After her graduation in 1964, Jean went to work for the Senate Republican Minority Leader, Everett Dirksen. When Jean learned that Bill was attending the platform committee of the Democratic National Convention, she concocted a brilliant scheme to have a message broadcast over the convention's PA system. Mr. Hochman from Colorado, please call Senator Dirksen's office immediately. This undoubtedly caused some suspicion amongst fellow delegates. An embarrassed Bill wondered what the hell was going on, only to discover that his former student had pulled a fast one, perhaps in retaliation for all those bending the knees to Franklin D. For the record, Jean later became a good Democrat. Let me conclude by observing how Bill Hochman never, ever peaked through his 97 years. Think about it. He retired from teaching at the age of 76, but as we all know, he was called back virtually every year as a guest lecturer until the last year of his life. When he was close to 90, Bill agreed to allow a full-length professional documentary about his war experiences. I, along with Bob Seelig and John Levis, raised funds to produce the documentary. As we worked on the project, Bill was there directing what music was and was not appropriate, what photographs to use, what dialogue was accurate. There would be no glorification of war. This nonagenarian was not to be messed with. His only thought, tell the story of how brutal and horrible war is. And in his early 90s, as Horst has mentioned, he would go week in, week out to the Zebulon Pike Youth Detention Center. Imagine Bill, somewhat frail, going through those clanking gates, sitting around a conference table with these troubled young people and introducing them to a subject that they knew nothing about but was very relevant to their future. He gave this up, but only at the age of 95. 3 weeks before his death, Bill was the keynote speaker to a packed house at the World Affairs Council, where he presented and discussed his documentary, Remembering Normandy. He wasn't feeling well, but Nancy urged him to go anyway. At the conclusion, of course, Bill got a standing ovation. There was no peaking for Bill Hochman. To the very end, he was always relevant, always at his best, a lesson for all of us. So we will miss you greatly, Bill, but you are all around us. You are an integral part of us. You have educated and mentored us well. We have taken your words and deeds to heart. Thank you for being such a special part of our lives, for loving us, and for being that courageous, unwavering, wonderful, warm inspiration. And if there is a heaven, I have no doubt that you are there, sitting side by side with Franklin D., chatting in front of that fire, resolving important questions of war and peace, and reaching down to protect our human dignity. May you rest in peace.
Bill's was a life of conviction and of consequence, a life of passion. Bill loved broadly his family, first of all, his children, his children's children, and his children's children's children, and his most beloved Nance. And he loved his friends. He talked about how much he loved the college, loved teaching, and loved his students. A person of insistent convictions, he poured himself into making society a more righteous place, and CC, as he said, into a truly excellent college. Bill was a person of notable stature. He stood tall, yes, but it was his character that really gave him stature. He stood for human rights, stood up to injustice, and stood by his friends and colleagues. With dignified carriage and measured stride, Bill long led academic processions as faculty marshal. Initially, the job meant preparing 3 marching lists for the faculty, meticulously ordered according to seniority. Sometimes it meant convincing students not to demonstrate. Always it involved imploring them to save the champagne until the ceremony's end. Bill loved the job, and he said he owed it to genetics. Well, partly. Height did help, but the assignment also signaled Bill's place at the college. CC was, he said, his life. By that he meant, I think, that he put a lot of his life into the college. And the college surely gained strength and vitality from that commitment. Bill took it as his great good fortune to teach bright students. Think how many minds he alerted to the American past, how many citizens he shaped. Literally, as we've heard, thousands. In his office, there was an enlarged photograph. Standing at the front of the class, wearing a suit, both arms raised high, there Bill was, brandishing words. Was that the time when he was exhorting the students to bend the knee to Franklin D? Was he concluding a story with a flourish, or adding a final exclamation point to the daily lesson? Freedom and authority held a special place in Bill's heart, as we've heard. Summoned to replace Lou Warner when Lou suddenly became dean in 1955, Bill insisted that he'd never heard of the thinkers listed on the syllabus. He figured it out, and so began his attachment to what became an iconic class, a must-do culmination for seniors. The students, Bill said, energized me, excited me, rejuvenated me. Bill's influence, as we've heard, reached well beyond the classroom. He was involved in everything. It's hard to find a corner of the college Bill did not touch. In a 4-year stint as chair, he transformed the education program. His ideas still dominate that program today. He headed countless committees, and he chaired the history department for 17 years. And then, toward the end of his career, in order to escape retirement, he agreed to direct the CC summer session. In all his posts, committees, and special assignments, Bill kept the college, its aims, and its possibilities in sight. He made sure that the administration understood the centrality of the faculty. When new presidents arrived, he introduced them to faculty at small lunches at his house. Nancy made the sandwiches. He also rallied the faculty to exert their influence. From his customary seat at faculty meetings on the right-hand side, 2 rows back and on the aisle, he admonished, nudged, and applauded. Bill unrelentingly pursued what he called the omnibus bill. To become an excellent college, CC, he insisted, had to eliminate ROTC, eliminate Division I athletics, eliminate fraternities and sororities, and get rid of the business major. Many of us remember just how insistently he campaigned to get that done. CC got halfway there, he would say, but, he said, not thanks to his efforts. No matter the context, Bill always militated for what he insisted was CC's better self. With an incisive turn of phrase, he summoned us to regard the fundamentals of our mission: educating the young, combating injustice, fighting for peace, taking the higher road. With his persistent appeals to do and be better, Bill achieved substantial changes in college policies, programs, and attitudes. He met some resistance, but he always proceeded undeterred. He worked on bringing people together. I remember frequent parties at his house. That's how I first met people at CC. These informal occasions for conversation made it that much easier to mobilize support for a controversial issue, and Bill knew it. He made a special point of supporting younger faculty. That, he insisted, was a chair's job. Maybe that's why he chose to overlook my skepticism about Woodrow Wilson's peace schemes. He accepted me despite my benighted ideas, but he never stopped trying to convince me of Clemenceau's villainy, nor I, him, of Wilson's naivete. Bill built a life of consequence. Some people mark what we do and are. Bill was one of those people, for me and for many others. He ranks as one of the great faculty members in Colorado College's history. With everyone here, I count myself privileged to have known Bill. I, with you, value Bill's idealism, his humanity, and his advocacy. Asked how he wanted people to remember him, he said, as a teacher. And so we do and will remember him that way, and in so many more ways. Thank you.
Because I knew you, like a comet pulled from orbit as it passes the sun. like a stream that meets a boulder halfway through the wood. Who can say if I've been changed for the better? But because I knew you, I have been changed for good.
It well may be that we will never meet again in this lifetime. So let me say before we part, so much of me is made of what I learned from you. You'll be with me like a handprint on my heart. And now whatever way our stories end, I know you have rewritten mine by being my friend. Like a ship blown from its mooring, like with the wind off the sea, like a seed dropped by a skybird in a distant wood. Who can say if I've been changed for the better? Because I knew you, because I knew you, I have been changed for good. And just to clear the air, I ask forgiveness for the things I've done you blame me for.
But then I guess we know there's blame to share, and none of it seems to matter anymore. Like a comet caught in orbit as it passes the
By a
sun.
wind off the
Like a
sea,
stream that meets
like
a
a seed
boulder
dropped by a
halfway through the
bird.
wood. Who can say if I've been changed for the better? I do believe I have been changed for the better. Because I knew you,
Because I knew you.
because I knew you, I have been changed for good.
Bill was a giant of a man. His passionate determination in his life's commitment to embodying what he valued, loved, fought for at home with loved ones, in the classroom, and in service to his country was expansive in its reach. And how could it not be for a man who gave himself so fully to everything he did? Because Bill knew the possible costs, tragic consequences, and ethical implications of thoughts and actions, as well as lack of thinking and inaction, and this drove him, having experienced the horrors of war, to wrestle with questions of freedom and authority, democracy and justice, violence and peace, to dedicate his life to awakening, encouraging, and empowering the minds of students, institutions, and community groups to possibilities of engaging in society, and in doing so, instilling in us our collective responsibility to finding ways to disagree civically in this experiment of democracy, and in this process, helping us to find ways to hold on to hope, not optimism, but hope. Knowing Bill, it's hard to imagine that before Normandy, as a 19-year-old studying to be an accountant, watching the night sky, sometimes contemplating the stars with awe as he tracked and charted them in the North Atlantic during World War II, that the trajectory of his life was headed in a particular direction, towards columns filled with numbers, quick addition, and a desk job, life as an accountant in New York City. It's hard to imagine because of how profoundly the pivotal moment in his life's reorienting came with such devastation and sacrifice when his ship went down with his shipmates and he floated in the icy waters of the English Channel, staring up at the stars, which he said to me is what kept him alive in the water, oriented and connected to something until he was rescued. A gratitude in the miracle of his life he chose to embrace every day, which led him in the between space of his hauntedness and resilience of his war experience to pursue a PhD in history and go into teaching, committed to democracy, committed to remembering, committed to help us not repeat not only what he experienced, but also the historical patterns of human beings at our worst, and instead share and build with us authentic community with space for dialogue with ourselves and others, peaceful resolution to conflict, and friendship, joy, and play in all of its complexities, teaching us how to be human, to have courage, to hope and work for change, to be present to not waste the gift of every moment as we embrace the miracle of our own lives, to realize how connected we all really are, to see how much we need each other, and what it means to live a life of service. Bill was a man of vision and ideals who lived his life in service to others, and we hold his service in the military and in his ceaseless civic and community engagement and service to us with the highest respect, honoring the transformative gift it was to all of us and to the world. In the fullness of Bill's life, we were gifted that Bill chose to share himself with us in so many different ways. We came to know his steadfastness, his generosity, discipline, encouragement, intellect, sarcasm, his strength and tenderness, and his heart. And being fully human, we also got to know the non-saintly parts of Bill at times too. His incredibly high expectations, his criticalness, stubborn, can hold a grudge side, which would drive us crazy at times. And we loved Bill. We loved Bill, and Bill loved us. And Bill's love of us lives on, as his heart space was as deep and wide as his intellect. To live fully, to embrace vitality, to dedicate one's life in the service of others, to be of use in the world, what more could a human being be asked to do? What a gift, what an incredible gift Bill was to all of us. So in this space, may we say to Bill, our dear one who stood firm, rooted like the tallest tree among us, Bill, you have given us so much. We respect you. We respect your journey through life, and we thank you for the gift of who you are and who you were to us. And we pray that you will continue to travel safely in this next part of your journey. And family, as you grieve this loss, each in your own way, may you be surrounded by compassion, gentleness of heart, knowing that you were loved deeply and that your love is still with Bill. In community, as we grieve this loss, let us comfort those who miss Bill, especially his wife, Nancy, and his children, Abby and Meg, John and Tim and Michael, and we think of Deanie, who recently died as well, and the grandchildren, Caleb and Seth, and Allison and Tess, and Jacob and Ari, Violet, Elsa, and Eric, and the great-grandchildren, Kalea, Kaena, Anna, Helena, Gregory, Ivy, and Max. Let us surround them with our love, and may we commit ourselves to embodying the best of Bill in our living. For now, this is enough. It has to be. And I pray that each of you will find your way experiencing the goodness of life, knowing the gentleness of spirit as you grieve. And may we honor Bill's memory by continuing to love each other. Blessed be. And before we transition, a few announcements. After the service, there is a reception in Palmer, which is in this direction. If you would like to travel there by way of a golf cart, there is a golf cart waiting for you in the by the north doors. So you can exit in this direction, and that will help you get to the place of the reception. So I invite us all just to take a moment in the space before we hear these words of benediction in the space that Bill spent so much time at convocations, hearing lectures, hearing music, just to take a moment to be in the space and connecting into that own place of thought or thankfulness that you might have for who Bill is in your life. And then hearing these words of blessing. Now let us go into the world glad that we have loved, free to weep for the one we have lost, empowered to live our lives the best of our ability as Bill did. And may the stars, which were full of wonder for Bill, which expanded his heart and guided him through challenging times, remind us of him and all that is good and possible in this world he held dear. And may all that is good and sacred bless us in this leaving. Amen.